Okay, good morning, GPAR. Welcome to Coffee Talk. We're so glad to have you with us on this Friday morning after a nice win by the Philadelphia Eagles last night. I know realtors do a lot of stuff, but if you're able to kick football straight and through the goalpost, I think we might have a job for you because we could probably use some help on that front. Just kidding around, but two missed field goals and an extra point, not the best thing to have happen, but Eagles prevailed. Awesome. Looking ahead from today, we have some other stuff in the hopper. Please keep an eye on your inbox for numerous sessions that we have coming up. We have some really great programming coming your way. We'd love to see you jump on Zoom. Easy, convenient, gives you opportunities to go ahead and up your game and be prepared to be the best that you can be. And that's what today is all about as well. So today we're going to welcome our president, 2024 GPAR president, Chris Mattioli. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Matt. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. I have the privilege of welcoming Kevin Gillen today. Most of us, our association, our membership has always been a huge advocate of Kevin. We've worked side by side with Kevin. His housing reports are always, jam-packed with useful data for our clients, but for our businesses. So I will get out of the way, Kevin, and hand it over to you to present. And I'm here if you need anything while you're presenting. Welcome, Kevin Gillen.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chris. Let me just pull up my screen here. It is telling me that, where are you? Share. Okay.
We can see your slide deck. So.
All right. Can you see the cover slide?
Yes, we can. Okay. Outlook for Philadelphia's housing market.
Great.
Yeah, Kevin, if you could put it in the shower.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Presentation mode.
Yep.
Here we go. Yeah, from beginning. That's what I'm trying to do. There we go. How's that?
There you go.
Looks Perfect. Good. I'm toggling down, toggling up.
We're good.
Very good. All right. Well, good morning to GPAR. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. And of course, go Birds. So we have today a two-part presentation. The first part will be the outlook for Philadelphia's housing market in the near term. And the second part will be on what the recently passed rent control legislation in City Council will mean not only for the market, but for your own business and practice as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it. First, we'll start with the housing market. And of course, the big one is, of course, prices. So here are the price indices for Philadelphia, which is the red line, for the Philadelphia suburbs, which is the green line. And then just for context, I have the U.S. National House Price Index, which is the blue line. We all know that since COVID, house prices have risen dramatically, both locally and nationally. These indices go all the way back to 1980, and they're through the current quarter. So here you can see, for those of you that are old enough, here's the boom of the 80s. Here's where sort of the recovery of the 90s. This is the housing bubble years in the mid-2000s. There's the Great Recession. And then you can see what we've done since then, and especially since COVID. House prices in Philadelphia on average, citywide, are up 60% in just 4 years. And that's roughly about 15% per year, all right? So just to give you historical context on that, if you invested your money in, say, a money market account, you'd be lucky to earn 1% per year. If you invested in the stock market, on average, your money earns about 8% per year. If you invested in a home in Philadelphia way back at the beginning of COVID, your money would have earned 20% per year. Now, that's obviously just the gross return. It's not net of taxes and fees and things like that. It's just the raw price appreciation, 20% per year. So it's been a hot market, not only locally, but nationally. If we break that out by county across the region, here I have the house price indices estimated by county. Again, the red line here is the same one as in the previous chart. That's Philadelphia right there. The green lines are the suburban counties. And again, you can see the price appreciation has been across the board. But Philadelphia is actually near the top of the tier. If you think of this as running something analogous to a horse race between house price growth by county, Philadelphia comes in at 4th place across roughly about 10 counties across the region. So it did pretty well. On the left, you'll see a bar chart that shows the median house price by county in 2024. Even with our dramatic price appreciation, though, we still remain the cheapest market across the metro area. The average house price in Philadelphia right now, even after this appreciation, is about $250,000. That's the red bar. And then the green bars are for each individual county. The big winner, no surprises, Chester County and Bucks County, the two most expensive counties in the region, between where the median price is between 425,000 and 435,000. Then you have Montgomery, where the median house price is about 400,000. Of course, Montgomery has the main line, but it also has some very cheaper markets like Norristown and so forth. And then the other counties are basically in between. It's the South Jersey counties. They've always been the laggards in terms of house price growth, as well as average house prices across the region. The Pennsylvania counties are typically much more expensive than the South Jersey counties. Of course, you have pockets in South Jersey like Cherry Hill and Collingswood and places like that. But significant price variation across the county, but they've all experienced significant price growth since COVID. But like I said, it says at the top, the Pennsylvania counties have generally outpaced the New Jersey and Delaware counties. So you want to know where the variation in prices is. This map shows all home sales in the latest quarter, Q3, color-coded by price per square foot. So I use what's called a temperature color ramp. The cooler colors, like the blue dots, dark blue and light blue dots, are the relatively cheaper priced homes in the metro area. And then the warmer colors, the red, yellow, and orange dots, are the relatively high-priced areas. And then the black lines you can see are the county boundaries. So you can see where the lowest prices are. The very, very lowest prices, as you can see, certainly probably to no one's surprise, there's North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, and then the inner ring suburbs in Delaware County like Yeadon and Darby and places like that. Notice that most of South Jersey is almost all blue compared to Pennsylvania. You can see there's a little hot pocket, if you will, oops, right there. That is the Cherry Hill, Haddonfield, Collingswood area. You can also see the cheaper suburbs. There's Trenton right there. That's Pottstown right there. Norristown right there. That's Chester there, and Wilmington right there. And then you can see where the money is. So Center City and the neighborhoods that are adjacent, you can definitely see the higher prices in places like Northern Liberties and Fishtown, which, as you know, have become quite hot. Northwest Philadelphia, the neighborhoods of Mount Airy, Chestnut Hill, even Roxborough, Manioc is right there. And then, of course, notice that as soon as you cross City Avenue, you go from some of the lowest priced homes in the metro area to some of the most expensive. This is the main line right there, this stretch of red out to here. And then, of course, once you get so far from the city that our daily commute's not really feasible, prices start dropping off quite dramatically. Oops, I don't know why it keeps doing that. So significant price variation across the metro area. And you can see just by crossing city lines or county lines, you can go from very poor to very rich, or vice versa. Notice when you cross from Bucks County into Trenton, New Jersey, again, you have a similar effect, but in reverse. You go from some of the highest priced homes in the region to some of the lowest priced. And even in the suburban collar counties of Pennsylvania, location and commute time is a key driver, as well as school quality and poverty. That's Norristown is really the only sort of inner ring suburb that's priced low. Once you get out into these more rural areas, the outer areas of the county, where, like I said, a daily commute to Center City is not feasible, the value of homes drops significantly, even though many of those homes are actually quite nice. But you know the old cliche about location, location, location. So that's prices. Now we'll talk about home sales. So this shows the number of home sales across the region. So this includes the suburban counties in addition to Philadelphia, going back to 2005. And much like prices, home sales are very cyclical. So even though we have seen they hit a peak during COVID, but they are trending down, as the red arrow shows. The red line represents the long-term average. So you can see right now for the past 2 years, we've been running slightly below average, but we're pretty close. Even though prices have risen significantly since COVID, sales have been trending down, and you probably know why, but here's the two reasons. For your first-time home buyers, affordability remains a major challenge, okay? The demand for to be an owner-occupant or a homeowner is there, but clearing that hurdle with the down payment when you're 28, 32, even 36 years old, to attain that 20% down payment for a home that, a regular home would, for a college-educated professional, pretty much starts at bare minimum $300,000. And coming up with that down payment is very challenging for young people. They're still paying off college debt. They might have lost their job or been laid off during COVID. Uh, Thankfully, during that time, they were able to improve their credit scores and reduce some of that debt. But clearing that down payment hurdle is a big one. And what I've heard from some realtors, and I'm including some GPAR members, is that they've seen cash assistance from their parents being a large percentage of first-time homebuyers becoming homeowners these days. So rather than waiting for these young people to get their inheritance when their parents pass on, the parents are just writing a check at closing right now to help cover that down payment and say, get into the house, start building wealth, and by the way, start delivering on the grandkids. So affordability remains the big hurdle for first-time home buyers. But for move-up buyers, the challenge they're facing is what we call the lock-in effect, and I'm sure most of you know about this. Because of the higher interest rates, in the last few years, they've risen, even though they're starting to tick down a bit. Well, more about that later. They're becoming locked into their home because even though many of these older move-up buyers would like to downsize because they're empty nesters now, the question for them is, why should I downsize to a smaller home that results in a higher payment for me due to the higher rates? Even if they want to even upgrade to a bigger home, inventories have been so low that their choice is limited. So their opinion is, why should I settle for, not my first choice home, but my third choice home that I only sort of like, and then I got to pay top dollar for it because of price appreciation, and then I've got to pay a higher mortgage payment due to higher interest rates. So many of them can't afford to make that move, and many of them don't want to make that move. Again, it's the old, the same challenge is the downsizing buyers. It's, why should I settle for a third-rate home that I got to pay top dollar for, and then have a higher mortgage payment for? I'll just stay in the home that I'm in and sort of wait this out for either prices to come down, inventories to go up, or interest rates to come down, or some combination of all three. But even though home sales are down since COVID, they're not housing bubble down, which is what you see way back here in the roughly from about 2009 to 2012. They're only just running slightly below average. So again, there's nothing to be scared of about that. That's just a normal cyclical, reversion to the mean, as we say in financial economics, as opposed to a bubble bursting or the market collapsing. So you probably want to know where the money is. So this shows all million-dollar home sales in Philadelphia in 2024 Q2. I didn't have time to do this for Q3 and for the presentation, but I'll be releasing this, the updated numbers in my latest report, hopefully next week. Million-dollar home sales in Philly are becoming less spatially concentrated. When I first started doing this report as a grad student 20 years ago, the only places you saw million-dollar home sales were very core Center City. I mean, not just Center City, but Rittenhouse Square and Washington Square. And then every once in a while, one or two up in Chestnut Hill. Again, they're not spread all over Philly, but they're definitely spreading out. So now you can see, again, this is still the two highest concentrations of million-dollar home sales are Rittenhouse Square right there, Washington Square over here, but now you see Queen Village, and even outside of Center City. I mean, you've got ones in University City, which was a very cheap market when I first came here to go to grad school. And you see even, Fishtown, Northern Liberties, areas like that. Not many, and this is but on a quarterly basis, but you never saw, even $500,000 home sales, again, 20 years ago. And we start to see even more percolating up in the Northwest, whereas you'd see maybe $1 or $2 million home sales in Chestnut Hill per year. Here you see 5 in just the past quarter. And not only in Chestnut Hill, you see 2 in Mount Airy, and believe it or not, there's even one over here in Roxborough, just off of Ridge Avenue. So overall, housing unaffordability has become an issue, not only in the Philadelphia market, but in other markets. But as you can see, the unaffordability is really starting to spread out as other neighborhoods which are adjacent to Center City or offer a fairly easy commute via, a SEPTA train like Northwest Philly. That money is starting to land there because Center City has become so expensive. As I'm sure many of you know, these are all million-dollar plus home sales. But a significant percentage of the ones in core Center City are $2-3 million home sales. So even affluent households, they can afford $1 million sale. There are those who can't afford to go to 2 or 3 million. So they're starting to move outside of Center City, where there's a lot of luxury new housing stock due to new construction. So my point is, we're seeing trending a spatial deconcentration of very high price sales in Philadelphia. if we look at the entire region, again, these are $1 million plus home sales across the metro area. Here you can really see where they're concentrated. And even though we are seeing more $1 million sales in Philly, the big money is still landing outside the city. Again, if you draw your eye, if I could draw your eye to City Avenue right there, notice again, just by crossing the street, you go from $0 million sales to lots of them. You know, this is of course Ardmore, Narberth, places like that. This is the whole main line right there. You see some big ones in Chester County, Montgomery County. These are very large houses on large plots of land. Mid-Bucks County, which is very affluent. Again, a lot of these are, converted barns and that you'd see in like Architectural Digest, places like that. Also, a lot of New York money. Whoops. I don't know why my mouse is so sensitive. So a lot of this is actually expatriate New Yorkers who moved to the region during COVID. They can't afford a $2 or $3 million home in Connecticut or the Hudson Valley, but they can't afford $1 million home in Bucks County. And moreover, they've got a very short commute to Trenton, which is right here, and it's a straight shot on Amtrak or even New Jersey Transit if you have the time up to New York. I mean, this is actually the tip of Staten Island right there. So you can see, once you're on that train, it's only about a 40-minute commute to Penn Station in New York. So you're paying Pennsylvania house prices, but you're still drawing a New York City income, which makes housing quite affordable to you, even luxury housing. And then the last cluster right here is, is Princeton in Mercer County. Technically, Mercer County is part of the region's MLS, but I really consider it more of part of the New York market because, again, if you live in Princeton, not only are chances are you're drawing a Princeton salary, but even if you're working in New York, you've got an even shorter commute. It's barely 30 minutes from Princeton to New York City. And by the way, the Princeton area is actually the most expensive housing in the metro area. People think it's the main line. It's not. What would be $1 million home in Ardmore is easily a $2 million home in Princeton because, again, it's got that location value of a quick and easy access to New York City, whether you work there or just do business there. So I mentioned inventories earlier. They still remain at all-time lows, but thankfully they are trending up. This chart shows the number of houses listed for sale in Philadelphia, and by the way, this is just Philadelphia County. You can see inventories tend to be a very good leading indicator of the market, by the way. So notice that here, inventory started rising back in 2005. And once, this is basically supply, right? So you all know the cliche about supply and demand. When supply starts increasing, or especially increasing faster than demand, you expect to see some, if not price moderation, price declines. So notice how inventories really exploded starting in 2005 up to their peak in 2007. And of course, in 2008 is when the bubble burst. That's when we started seeing price declines. And then, inventories have been steadily declining ever since as the markets try to recover. The long-term average is roughly about 4,000 to 5,000 homes listed for sale in this city. Once it's above that, what you have is a buyer's market because supply outstrips demand. And once you're below that, which is where we were during COVID, it's a seller's market because demand exceeds supply. So when inventories are very, very low, there's typically upward pressure on prices due to low supply. But where have we been since we hit bottom roughly in around 2022? Inventories have been rising again, thank goodness, which is a good thing. Not only does it help with some price moderation to make homes more affordable, but it also can bring buyers and sellers out of off the bench and into the game because now there's a better selection of houses to choose from. Anecdotally, what I've heard is that one of the reasons sales have been down since they hit their peak right after people began working from home during COVID is because selection is so low. So it's not just purely economic factors like unaffordability that keep people from either buying or selling, but also if the selection of homes to choose from is very low, well, again, why should you pay top dollar, when prices are very high for your third or fourth choice home? You might pay top dollar for your first choice home because it's your dream home. But again, why should you settle for a home that's you just sort of like rather than love? But you're paying a very high price or top dollar for it. So inventories have risen roughly 40% since bottoming out in 2021. They're not quite back to where they should be, but they are getting there. And again, I view that as a good thing because it not only lets some steam off on price growth, but it also brings a lot of buyers and sellers back into the market because now they're enticed by a greater choice of housing for sale. So you all probably know what month's supply of inventory is. Even though month's supply of inventories and inventories are ticking up, it still remains a very strong seller's market. This shows the month's supply of inventory in the Philadelphia region. So this on the vertical axis shows how many months it would take to burn off the current supply of homes that are listed for sale. So at the current pace of sales that we have right now, which is just below average, we'd burn through our inventory of homes listed for sale in about 2 months. Typically 5 to 7 months is considered a balanced market, balance between buyers and sellers. So it still remains a very strong seller's market because we're at 2 months supply, and anything less than 5 months is considered a seller's market. That may sound good if you're a seller, but again, sellers face the locked-in effect due to interest rates. And also, if the buyers are not, getting off the bench and into the game because there's so little selection to choose from, that you may have great price negotiation or price leverage in negotiations if you're a seller. But if there's no buyers that are interested in your home, well, it doesn't matter how much leverage you have. You need an actual person willing to bid on your home. Thankfully, even though inventories have risen from their bottom back in 2022, where they were at 1 month of supply, we are still well below where we need to be to have a balanced market. So inventories, even though inventories are finally rising, they've been offset by falling sales, again, due to unaffordability and the lock-in effect that I previously mentioned. All right, so that's where we are. What should you expect going forward? Well, I don't have an explicit forecast, but I can tell you what the numbers strongly suggest to me. First of all, the days of double-digit annual appreciation are largely over. They're good while they last. Price appreciation is great. It gets people excited. They think they're buying into an asset that's going to grow in value significantly, especially in the short term. But you can't have price growth outpacing income growth indefinitely because that creates affordability problems, and that's what we've had. So high price growth, high returns on investing in housing are great in the short term, but in the long term, if, again, you have prices growing faster than incomes, that becomes bad because that creates unaffordability and it creates reluctance on the part of buyers because they don't want to buy something that they think is overpriced. And also, it places a lot of homes beyond what they're able to afford. So you want to bring prices back into line where within incomes where people are spending roughly 30% of their annual income on either rent or their mortgage payment plus property taxes and maintenance. Beyond that, you run into unaffordability, and that's going to drive down home ownership, which is bad for everyone. Bad for your business, and bad for the economy, and bad for society because housing is such a huge part of the economic pie. And it also affects everyone socially too, because homeowners, when you become a homeowner, you basically become a shareholder in your community. And you become invested in your community. You care about school quality. You care about crime. You care about how clean your streets are, how good your parks are. When you rent, you don't care about things like that, generally speaking. But if you drive down home ownership, it can result in a less livable and desirable environment and a less stable society as well. Next, inventories I expect will continue to tick up, but slowly. They've been rising slowly. There's no reason to think that they won't continue to rise slowly unless there's some major change in the market, again, like lower interest rates or a significant boost in household income. We know we've had, since the election, the stock market has risen quite significantly, something like 5% in just 1 week, not a year. But remember, the annual return on the stock market is about 7-8% per year. We're up 5% in just the last 10 days or so. But again, I don't think that's enough of an income effect to suddenly people feel like they're wealthier and they can buy a home. We need some more. Interest rates. I did this presentation last week. I predicted may come down a bit more. Since then, they have just a bit. Whether they'll go down even more depends, again, a lot on how the economy and particularly inflation is going to do. We know that inflation is down to 2% from its peak of 5%. But, it's still, if it doesn't come down a bit further, or worse, it goes up, we're going to see higher rates. So we have inventories ticking up. That's going to result in some increased supply. We're going to have price moderation due to unaffordability. If people aren't buying, then sellers have to, reconcile themselves to a leveling off or some slight reduction in prices. And that's going to equal a more balanced market between buyers and sellers. I think that's a good thing because, again, we want to keep home ownership high. Even though Philadelphia is a relatively poor city, we are notable for having a home ownership city. More than 50% of all households in Philadelphia own their home because, again, we remain a very affordable market relative to places like New York or San Francisco. So we want to have a more balanced market between buyers and sellers because we don't want irrational prices. We don't want home ownership plummeting. So sprinkle in some lower rates, and that the big one, hopefully we'll see sales activity returning towards normal. Not very quickly, but I would expect sometime in 2025, all else being equal. There's a lot riding on, how the new administration is going to do. And I know I don't want to wade into to politics. It's just too hot of a topic for most people. But I don't think it's controversial to say that what is going to happen economically in 2025 is going to depend on a lot of the moves that the new administration will be making. And I'm an economist, not a political scientist. I can't predict what they're going to do. But all else being equal, I would expect to see sales activity returning towards normal in 2025, where we have a more balanced market between buyers and sellers. And that's a good thing. I mean, high prices are great for your commission, but they're not great if they're so high that nobody's buying, right? So you'd rather have a more balanced market where there's more churn in the market and homes are actually changing hands, even if they're not doing so at their previous very highest prices. At least that's what I would think. But again, I'm not a realtor. So that's what I would expect going forward. And I'd love to take some questions at this point, but I want to give you the next part of the presentation is I want to give you my gospel on rent control and what it means for Philadelphia. So how applicable is rent control to Philadelphia, and what does the current bill mean? So the background on this, City Council recently passed a new bill, and it was with a veto-proof majority, but Sherelle Parker's signed it into the law anyway. Basically, it's going to implement citywide rent control in Philadelphia, but in a very unconventional, untraditional way. Philadelphia, what it's going to do is it's going to ban the use of algorithmic, artificial intelligence software for landlords to set rents. If you are caught doing this, basically you're going to have to pay a fine. So basically, if landlords set rents, that's equivalent to colluding to fix prices and basically result in price gouging, okay? And the city doesn't want that. So rather than impose just citywide rent control where the government determines what the maximum rent can be for a given unit in a given property and location, it's just basically trying to disrupt landlords from colluding with each other using algorithmic or AI software to set rents because collusion is illegal. It's basically equivalent to instead of a monopoly, you have what we call an oligopoly, which is when you have just a few firms coordinating with each other to artificially restrict supply and set rents at a higher level than they would be if those same companies were competing with each other. It was motivated by the fact that rents have risen significantly over the recent years, as well as the fact that San Francisco has implemented rent control, far-reaching citywide rent control, and we are now the second major city in the U.S. after San Fran to implement rent control. So here's how it works. Rather than just setting rents, basically what the legislation enforces is that landlords who ignore the order of using the algorithmic software will be charged with a fine of up to $2,000 per violation. And I believe that's per violation per unit. So if you own 100 units, you can see that's going to be a $200,000 violation, right? So for large corporate landlords, this could result in some very, very big fines. Who enforces this? Basically, those landlords could be sued by the city and either current or prospective tenants. So it's not just up to the city to enforce this. Individual tenants can bring suit or tenants' rights organizations, which is what I would expect. Sorry, just needed a sip of coffee there. All right. So moving further into this, here's how it works. That's correct. And Matthew and Chris were instrumental in testifying against this legislation at the council. So don't worry, at the end of this, I'll get to thanking them, believe me, because they really went to bat not only for GPAR, but for the entire housing and real estate industry in Philadelphia. Adam, let me save the questions till the end, and then I'll answer them then. Because a lot of the answers are going to be in this presentation. So here's how it's actually going to work, okay? So let's say the city finds a landlord or a group of landlords guilty of implicit colluding by sharing the same software algorithms to set rents artificially higher than they would be if they weren't using this software. So if the city wins the lawsuit under the current legislation, the defendant has to pay actual damages, meaning the dollar difference between the artificially high rents and what the market rent would be, or $1,000 per violation if they decide to settle with the city. Okay. If a resident, that is, a tenant or a prospective tenant, and by the way, prospective tenants can file suit as well, not just existing tenants. If a resident wins a suit, they're entitled to 3 times the value of the damages, or $2,000 per violation in the case of a settlement. The reason that the tenants get more dollars if they win the suit or win a settlement is because the city wants to entice tenants and tenant organizations to get involved in this process, because the city just doesn't have the resources to monitor every landlord in the entire city. So that's what's going to happen there. So the landlords are not going to be told by the city what rents they can charge. Instead, the city has to charge landlords with the accusation that they are using this software to artificially set rents higher than they would be otherwise. All right, so let's step back and take a big picture look at what the motivation for this bill is, and basically what the argument for and against rent control, not only in Philadelphia, but in any major city would be. So no secret, this is what really got the tenants' rights organizations motivated and city council members motivated to pass this bill, is the simple fact that Philadelphia rents are up sharply since COVID. So this shows the median monthly rent in Philadelphia. Now that's the orange line. So you can see the sharp increase since COVID. Why? Well, people shifted from working in offices to working from home. As a vice president at NAR said at a presentation he did, because of COVID, your home not only became where you live, it became where you work. And because you couldn't go out, it also became your restaurant. It became your home gym. It became your home spa. It became your home theater. So all the money that people were spending outside their home, they suddenly started spending on their home. And this resulted in an increase in rents as housing underwent a lot of investment, both in Philadelphia and across the region. So all these upgrades to units and new construction for units, they started charging top dollar for them because people were now spending so much more time at home, and people were willing to pay top dollar because they're spending so much more time at home. I mean, the more of something you consume and the more you want to consume, the higher the price you'll pay for it. It's Econ 101. And that resulted in a big spike in rents since COVID. And you can see rents are up 26% since COVID. And the increases, the rate of increase is much higher than it has been traditionally when rents were basically growing with inflation. So for those that are pro rent control, and I would imagine there might be some here, you're absolutely correct. Rents have grown significantly in recent years, outpacing their historic growth. They used to grow about 6% per year, and since COVID, they've grown 26%. Okay, so significant inflation, not only in house prices but also in rents, along with everything else in the economy like groceries and gas and energy and things like that. So significant inflation in rents. And by the way, rents have outpaced incomes as well, just like house prices. So the bill's proponents not only point to that, they also point to the fact that San Francisco has rent control, and their program could serve as a model for Philadelphia. However, rents are much higher in San Francisco than they are in Philadelphia. This shows the median monthly rent in both cities as of right now. In San Francisco, the typical apartment's going to run you about $3,500 a month. In Philadelphia, about $1,600 a month. So it's actually, San Francisco rents are basically more than double what they are in Philadelphia. And that's so despite rents being regulated by city government, San Francisco's rents are still much higher than Philadelphia's. Like I said, up $3,500 compared to about $1,600. So rent control does not appear to have worked in San Francisco as much as they'd like it to. But again, incomes in San Fran are much higher than here. Moreover, not only is the level of rents higher in San Francisco, San Fran's rent growth has outpaced Philadelphia's for some time. So this chart shows the median monthly rent over time in Philly versus San Fran. In 2000, the typical San Francisco monthly rent was about $743 greater than Philly, or about 100%. So rents 24 years ago in San Fran were roughly double what they were in Philly. Now, the typical San Fran rent is nearly $2,000 higher than it was in Philly, which is 115.6% difference. So not only are rents higher in San Fran than in Philly, but rent appreciation in San Fran has been higher than in Philly. So if you want to argue that rent control has worked in San Fran, it's difficult to make the case because not only are you could say their rents are legitimately higher than ours because their income is higher than ours, but the rate of rent growth in San Fran has also outpaced the rate of rent growth in Philadelphia. It's also failed to keep San Francisco's house prices affordable, again, especially compared to Philadelphia. So I showed you the median rents. This is the median house price in San Fran versus Philly. Median house price in San Fran is about almost $1.3 million, okay? Median house price in Philly is almost about $250,000. Big difference. That's $1 million plus difference. Okay. So you think people complain about affordability in Philadelphia. Just imagine you make a Philadelphia income, but you live in San Fran. There's no way you're becoming a homeowner. Even if you're in, you know, maybe the top 5 or 10% could afford a home at $1 million plus, because that's how many homes we have here in Philly. I mean, no more than 5% of home sales are $1 million plus. So just imagine if take the total number of home sales, the total number of homes that you've either listed or represented as a buyer's agent in the last year, and then reduce that by 95%. That's the market challenge you'd be facing in San Francisco. Okay. So not only are rents higher in San Fran than Philly, but also house prices are as well. Philadelphia's house prices are not only below San Francisco's, though, they're also below the national average. So here's the same chart comparing median prices in Philly. That's the orange bar. In San Fran, the blue bar. And then the black bar is the average median house price in the U.S. So we're not only cheap compared to other expensive cities, we're cheap compared to the national average, which includes suburbs, by the way. So even with the rent growth and price growth here, we still remain a relatively affordable city. There's a real problem we have with affordability is only partially due to high house prices. It's the fact that house prices are high relative to our very low incomes. All right. We are a poor city. You've all heard the number. We're the largest poor city in America. 25% of our population lives at or below the poverty rate. So that's the poorest big city in America is Philadelphia. San Francisco's house price growth, just like rent growth, has also outpaced Philadelphia's. So this shows the median house price over time in Philly versus San Fran. Philly's the orange line, San Fran is the blue line. The difference between the two way back in 2000 was about 344,000 difference. That is, San Fran house prices were $344,000 higher than Philly's. Now the spread is over $1 million. Again, due to the higher house price appreciation. So not only are house prices also higher, not only are house prices in San Fran higher than house prices in Philly, the difference between the two has also grown over time. And my point here is that rent growth does not seem to have done much work in San Francisco. So even though the proponents of this bill point to San Francisco as the model for Philly, the whole point of these slides that I'm trying to convey to you is that it doesn't really seem to have worked there. It still remains a very unaffordable city. Now, one reason for Philadelphia's sluggish house price growth, and the fact that our house price growth, has lagged San Fran's and our rent price growth, is that unlike in San Francisco, we've had negative population growth. So this shows the population in both cities, going back to 1970. As you can see, the orange line is Philly, the blue line is San Fran. Philadelphia has generally lost population since the 70s. We were about 2 million people back in 1970. We're down to about 1.5 million now. In the meantime, San Francisco, even though it's a smaller city than ours, much smaller city than us, roughly about half the size, it has experienced significant population growth. It was about 1.7 million people back in 1970. It's about 800,000 people today. But by the way, you can see the declines from COVID are evident in both cities. You can see a really sharp decline in San Francisco. That's due to a much higher rate of crime and homelessness there than we've had here. But even with the depopulation, I should say, since COVID, as evidenced by the downward trend in the orange lines. On that, taking the long-term perspective, population growth has been much higher in San Fran, whereas it's actually been negative in Philadelphia. Since 1970, population here has fallen by about 0.4% per year, compared to 0.2% annual growth in San Francisco. And of course, population changes are one of the biggest driver of house prices, especially over the long term as opposed to the short term. And not only is our population growth underperforming San Francisco's, but also is our income growth. And again, this is the other main driver of house prices in the long run. So going back to 1990, the blue line is the median household income in San Fran. The orange line is the median household income in Philly. Way back in 1990, there was about, call it an $8,000 difference. San Francisco's incomes were about $8,000 higher than Philly. But notice how big the spread has grown in income between the two cities. Right now, the difference in income is about $80,000 between the two cities. In other words, incomes in San Fran on average are about $80,000 higher than incomes in Philly. So again, when you have positive population growth and high income growth, even with rent control, There's no defying the fundamentals of the market. But so we were trying to impose a San Francisco solution on Philadelphia problems, and our problems are much different than San Fran's. We don't suffer from high house prices due to income growth or due to population growth. We suffer high house prices due to low interest rates but our house prices still remain very low compared to other U.S. cities. Our real problem is that our house price growth has been faster than our income growth, and our income growth or income levels are still very, very low. Adjusted for population, also our new home, that's the demand side, income and population growth. On the supply side, construction costs and land costs are the big drivers of the supply side of the equation for housing. So adjusted for population, Philadelphia's new home construction lags San Francisco's. In 30 of the last 40 years, San Francisco has built more housing for its population than Philly. So this shows the number of new housing units per person in each city. Again, Philly here is the blue line, San Fran is the orange line. That big blue spike you're probably wondering about, that is the rush by developers to get their building permits approved before changes to the abatement took place. Now, this is the number of approved units, not necessarily the number of built ones. That's why that big spike is there. So that doesn't mean Philadelphia's going to add 16 new units per person over the next year. It just means they applied for and got approved to build. The developers in Philly applied and got approved to build 16 new units per person over the next year. But my main point here is notice that over time, the orange bars are higher than the blue bars, and the orange bars are San Francisco. So in any given year, adjusted for population, differences in population in the two cities, San Francisco has built more new housing per year. Prior to COVID, Philly has built only 1.1 new housing units per person annually, compared to 2.7 units per person being built annually in San Francisco. And again, that's because the fundamentals of the San Francisco market are much better than in Philly. So even though we've gone through a new construction boom compared to our own history, our new construction boom that we've seen, since COVID and even back in the teens, is much, much less than the new construction boom in other cities, even after you control for differences in the sizes of population across cities. So that's one of the reasons that we've seen this house price appreciation is we are not building nearly as many new units as we would otherwise if our fundamentals were better. And since COVID, construction cost growth has outpaced inflation. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes construction cost indices by market. The orange line here is the cost of building materials going back to 1980s. This is a national number. And then the blue line is the consumer price index, which is basically the rate of inflation. Notice that historically construction costs, which is basically the cost of materials. So this is it's a composite index that includes the cost of lumber, the cost of steel, the cost of sheetrock, the cost of tile, things like that. And it measures the rate of materials costs over time. And like I said, notice that historically the blue line and the orange line track each other pretty closely, meaning historically construction costs generally grow with the general rate of inflation in the economy. But notice that since COVID, they've really spiked, and they moderated in the last year or so, but they still was a significant growth. And again, that's because, like I said, people started investing heavily in homes because they spend more time there. So they not only did we build new homes with better amenities, but people were upgrading their existing homes because they were spending more time there. Like I said, your home is not only where you live, it's where you work, it's where you play. So the more time you spend there, the nicer the home you want to be. So you'll remodel your kitchen, you'll add a home theater, maybe a built-in walk-in, fully tiled spa shower. Name your amenity, right? And that plus the supply chain choke points that we experienced during COVID. So a very sharp increase in construction costs. So my point here is that the advocates for the bill will point to rising rents as a rationale for rent control. But at the same time, the owners of homes and the developers of homes have faced a similar dilemma with the rising cost of construction. So they're the ones that actually have to pay for the real rent control. If you cap the rents that they can charge, but in the meantime, their cost of development is going up, well, they're going to underinvest in housing. And that means your housing stock will depreciate in quality because it's being underinvested and undermaintained, and it's going to decline in quality. So yeah, you'll get low rents with rent control, but basically you're going to get a crappier unit, to use a technical term. So again, this compares construction costs pre and post COVID. Notice that historically, the orange bar, which is residential construction costs, grew at 2.4% per year compared to 3% is the rate of inflation. But post-COVID, since 2020, construction costs have grown by 8.6% per year, while inflation has averaged 5% per year. So even though we've had high general inflation in the economy, we've had really high inflation in construction costs. So even though rents may be higher and house prices may be higher, they still have risen slower than the cost of construction. And so that results in not only less new housing being built, which again creates affordability problems because supply is not rising to meet demand. It also creates housing quality problems because since the materials costs are so high and construction costs are so high, landlords and developers and owners face a very strong disincentive to maintain or even improve their housing. So that results in declining housing quality over time, even though housing prices have risen. Okay, an important point. So to then on top of that, if you're going to ladle on rent control, you're just begging for the quality of your city's housing stock to decline over time because you're going to get your lower rents, but you're also going to get lower quality housing because it costs too much to improve and maintain them, and especially to build new housing. All right, so how high do material costs adversely impact housing? This affects everyone. High material costs, high construction costs affect everyone. First of all, it makes tenants and home buyers poorer. Because high costs make it more expensive to build homes, it becomes more expensive to buy or rent one. And that's going to affect you guys because if it's more expensive to buy or rent a home, you've got fewer homes changing hands over time. Second, it drives up home insurance premiums. And we all know that insurance costs have soared over the past year in response to the higher cost of materials used to repair homes after claims, okay? If it costs more to fix a home after, another hurricane or something like that, well, then insurance costs are going to go up and premiums will reflect that. Third, it makes it more difficult for appraisals and tax assessments to reflect true market values. Again, if the cost of materials is rising very rapidly and significantly, builders will respond by either decreasing the quality and or the quantity of their amenities, or they will increase their sale prices. These volatile fluctuations in housing quality and prices make it very difficult for both appraisers and assessors to mark both existing and new homes to market, and this leads to inaccurate valuations. So that complicates both the home buying and the city budgeting process. For most municipalities, the property tax is a major source of income. Well, if that income stream is bouncing around like crazy and you can't predict it, that makes budgeting very difficult, and that can result in lower quality or even volatile city services. So one year you'll have a good police budget to reduce crime, but the next year crime will skyrocket because the funding of the police department didn't go up enough. And secondly, just for your own narrow self-interest, it complicates the home buying process because getting a decent appraisal is very difficult when house prices are bouncing all over the place, the actual house prices. So marking your listing home to market is very challenging. So my point here is the bottom line. Higher building costs ultimately make everyone worse off. Tenants, new home buyers, existing home buyers, and taxpayers and realtors all become worse off because high construction costs decrease both the affordability and the quality of housing. So it's just bad all around. Finally, and here's the key point argument against rent control in Philadelphia, construction cost inflation has also outpaced Philadelphia rent growth. So the advocates of rent control point to the high rate of rent increases. It doesn't, but it's still, even our high rate of rent increases, it still exceeded the rate of construction cost growth, the cost of materials. So these bars compare the two. The blue bar is Philadelphia rents pre and post COVID. The orange bar is the U.S. Residential Construction Cost Index. So yes, rents have grown by about 6% per year in Philadelphia during COVID, compared to about 2.6% pre-COVID. But construction costs have grown by 8.6% per year. So even with the increase in rent growth, homeowners home builders and developers have faced an 8.6% in the cost of building and maintaining those homes. So and rent control will only exacerbate that situation, because if you're going to start capping rents such that they won't cover the cost of construction or the cost of maintenance or the cost of upgrades, then the quality of your housing will decay over time. So again, you'll get your low-priced affordable housing, but that housing is going to suck in terms of its quality, to put it bluntly. So unless you think I'm pitching some right-wing libertarian pro-free market gospel here, here's some responses from President Biden last July. Wants to propose to impose national rent control on corporate property owners. Here's the responses from some people across the political spectrum. Governor Polis, who's a Democrat, the Democrat governor of Colorado, said this kind of cap would lead to less affordable housing being built and substantially increase housing costs. That's a typo there, sorry. And Jason Furman, who's the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama, and presumably a Democrat, said that rent control has been about as disgraced as any economic policy in the toolkit. Matt Iglesias, an economics and policy writer who also writes generally from a left-wing perspective, wrote, "Rent control is a bad idea. We want a world of abundant housing, and you get that by making it easier to build more housing." And again, the quotes go on. David Dworkin, who's president of the National Housing Conference, said, "Rent caps don't work and will have a chilling effect on housing supply, making clear that long-term investments in housing can be made uneconomic retroactively." And then we have some views from the right. Tobias Peter, who's from the American Enterprise Institute, said rent caps have many unintended consequences. Foremost, that fewer homes will be built. And to that, I would add, fewer homes will be sufficiently maintained or improved. It also creates inequality in the rental market. And then lastly, we have someone from the New York Rent Stabilization Association, which you think would be pro-rent control. But he wrote that a federal rent cap would collapse the housing market throughout the country, just as it would surely wreck lending, building, and the quality of life for tenants everywhere. So wrapping this up, what's going to be the impact of this bill going forward? Well, first of all, the law is primarily targeted at large corporate owners of multifamily properties. That means apartment building owners and owners that use algorithmic AI software when they compute their pro formas. So that's only about 3.3% of all rental units in Philadelphia. All right. So the only real targets of the bill are the really big corporate landlords. And of those, they have to use this sophisticated algorithmic AI software. So small landlords are basically excluded from this, and especially what I call the mom and pop accidental landlords. So these are middle-aged adults whose parents passed away. They inherit their parents' row home in North Philly, West Philly, and they rent it out. You know, they're part-time landlords. They didn't intend to be landlords, and they certainly are not using advanced algorithmic AI software to compute the cash flows, expected cash flows from the unit. So they don't have to worry about this. So the second thing that's important about this bill is that it puts the burden of this bill is on the city and tenants rights organizations and not landlords to establish proof of violation. So the burden is on the city and tenants, not on landlords. So the city or the landlords, the city or the tenants associations have to legally establish proof of violation. And again, only 3.3% of landlords in Philadelphia fit the target profile of quote unquote large landlords. So the majority of the city's housing stock will be unaffected for two reasons. The segment of the market that this bill targets is very small, and moreover, the burden of proof is on the city and tenants' rights organizations to bring suit to court, not on the landlords, which is what you would have with citywide rent control. The city would just say, okay, rents in this zip code for a single family row home can be no more than X dollars per month. The city's not doing that. Landlords have to be specifically targeted, and the city or tenants' rights have to prove that not only are they colluding using algorithmic software, but they are actually rents are in their units are higher than they would be otherwise. That's a pretty hefty burden. So basically, as far as traditional rent control, New York City style rent control goes, we really dodged a bullet on this. And please thank Matt and Chris and the rest of the GPAR officers for really fighting the good fight on this. Their testimony to council meant a lot. Originally, this bill did want to impose citywide rent control and has been significantly watered down so that it does not affect the majority of the market. And if you're wondering if your officers are earning their time and salary, believe me, I assure you they are, because I was part of the coalition that helped to fight this. So wrapping it up, however, the bad news of that is although we sort of won this battle in the sense that we didn't completely defeat it, but we really got it watered down. This is only a short-term forecast. All right? I can tell you that the advocates for this bill are unlikely to just stop. If this law has a minimal negative effect on the market, which I think it will because it affects such a small segment, they will cite this as evidence that rent control can work. And they will proceed with trying to convince City Council to pass a bill that will impose citywide rent control on all rental units, all right? So that can lead to additional legislation, like I wrote, that imposes the New York-style rent control where city government actually sets rents rather than the landlords. And to that, there's an old saying by a man named Assar Lindbeck. He's a Swedish economist. And he once said that in many cases, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except for bombing. Want proof? That's Hiroshima in 1945. Hiroshima, Japan, 1945. That's the Bronx in 1981, where there was significant rent control, still is, in New York City. All right. So think about that going forward. We're out of the woods for now, but I expect more of this type of legislation in the future. And if it passes, what you see there in the Bronx is the future I would expect. So on that cheery note, thank you. Hopefully we'll look forward to a more balanced market next year, and hopefully any further cost burdens that are imposed on the city's landlords will also wait a while. So with that, if you have any questions, I would be happy to take them.
Thank
So
you very much. Did you want us to verbalize or you doing it through the chat?
I would suggest dropping it into the chat, please.
Yeah, thank you, Annette. I think most, or better yet, some of the questions were answered through the rest of Kevin's presentation. But go ahead, Annette. Did you put it in there? Can't see the chat yet.
I did, in regards to whether it was presented to City Council, the slides.
So
Kevin?
I'm going to answer that question because we were heavily involved in negotiations as it relates to this particular piece of legislation. Annette, lots of information was presented to council members, both at the hearing as well as before the hearing. Many hours were spent. Kevin was a part of the game planning that went on. We had the whole real estate coalition get together. And we painstakingly went over impacts on various markets, what could happen here. And I think it goes to one of the other questions that are in the chat. It's like, hey, is this really like rent control? And as Kevin said, this is one of these things where it's a matter of trying to create momentum. And if you get a little piece here, get a little piece there, and then the next thing you know, it's like the Just Cause bill. Initially, when that was introduced, we were able to push back on a lot of different perspectives or initiatives that were built inside the original legislation. It was amended. And ultimately what happened was Councilman Jones went back and got what he didn't get on the first pass, on the second pass, a couple of years later. So I think that this is one of those things where what we're talking about is an educational process. I think we tried to do that. We tried to explain it to them, the unintended consequences of this. The difficult part was this: when you have so many council members who co-sponsor a piece of legislation, it's like the deck is already stacked before you've even had a conversation. And that was really hard, in addition to it being put on a ultra tight timeline. There was not an opportunity to really allow for full digestion of this legislation. Essentially, it was introduced and then a hearing took place in about 2 weeks. That is like light speed. And so that really makes things really hard to get things to stick in those types of conversations.
Matt or Chris, do you want to referee the questions that are coming in? And
I think our challenge right now is time. So let's go in and see if we can get a question in here real quick.
I guess, Kevin, it looks like it was repeated a couple times there. Do you have an economic perspective on the arena, the 76ers?
I have
Has there been any studies as to what that?
Yeah, I have a perspective, but not a position. Part of the reason is that Drexel's Lindy Institute, where I work, we have to be very careful about taking explicit positions on political matters. But we can take positions on what factors everyone should be considering in determining, the stadium. One personal story I can share is that I lived in Washington, D.C. in the 90s before I moved here to Philly to go to grad school. And the Chinatown there is much more peripheral to downtown and was much more, I would say, we would characterize a distressed neighborhood. And this is when they were considering the MCI Center to be built, of course, where was it the Nets play? And no, yeah, the Nets. Sorry, I'm not a big basketball guy. The Chinese community there was overwhelmingly enthusiastic about having the stadium built there. Because like I said, it was a more remote area of town. It wasn't downtown like ours is. And like I said, it was a more of a distressed area, especially after dark. I mean, when I was in my 20s, Chinatown was where you go after partying on a Friday or Saturday night. But you always went as a group. You didn't want to be wandering those streets alone. And so the community there was very enthusiastic because they thought it'd be a big catalyst, not only for development, but since most of their businesses were restaurants, after the game, people would patronize their restaurants, and they got their wish. And I know the Chinatown community here sought, the DC community's advice. Since then, the DC community has come to regret it because, yeah, they got the development they wanted, but they also got very high real estate prices, and many of the restaurant owners, they were poor immigrants. They didn't own those properties; they rented, so they saw their rent spike. Then you had major parking problems, and then the last one, which they were very reticent to say publicly, is you had a spike in crime, even bigger, because you would have people go to the game, basketball fans, many of them young men. They'd be drunk and they'd come into the restaurants in groups. And often some of these groups were gang members. And you get into fights and shootings, stabbings in their own restaurants. And no one wants to be policing that stuff. And the community here has taken that to heart. And although very many, if not any of them, might vocalize that concern, I've heard it in one-to-one conversations. So I could expect a similar dynamic here. Basketball prices today ticket prices are not what they were in the 90s. So, you might get a more genteel crowd. I don't know how else to put it. But again, I would certainly expect, again, the same problems with spiking real estate prices, spiking rents, which renters won't benefit from. They'll be hurt by it, as well as we know our Chinatown already has major traffic congestion and parking problems. So that question needs to be resolved as part of the solution if this stadium is going to be built there.
No, thank you again. And I would say that, this kind of pulls it back to the beginning here for me of this year, where engagement and membership involvement is key. You have a strong position on some of these topics, getting you involved, getting you active, writing these, testifying in these things to help sway city council and understand where these things should be at is really important. So Kevin presented a lot of strong data points. I think for me, we've been talking about it a lot, and former President Alan Dom has been pushing for the income disparity. We need better jobs for our residents so they can make more money. We have some of the lowest under $35,000 income jobs in the country, the highest number of them. And we have the least number of jobs between $35,000 and $100,000 annual income. We need to get better opportunities and more businesses to help promote that income inequality that we're struggling with. Matt, I know we're up on time. I know that through the chat,
Okay.
I'm trying to watch it.
All right.
Any of those questions, you can certainly email to us and we will try and get those answered.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Kevin, for your time. Thanks for your research and your great presentation today. Thank you to the GPAR members for tuning in. This is a great turnout. We wish you all a great Friday and an even better weekend. Take care and watch your inbox for more upcoming GPAR events. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.